The History Things podcast is brought to you by TR Historical, your one-stop shop for all your historical fan gear needs. Visit trhistorical.com and use the promo code HistoryThings to receive 10% off your next purchase. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the show.
Are you ready?
Welcome to the History Things podcast, field video exclusive, brought to you by TR Historical, your one-stop shop for all your history, nerdy, geeky, historical fan gear needs. Shop trhistorical.com right now. Use the promo code HistoryThings from now until the end of February to get 10% off your next purchase from those guys. Perfect for the holiday season coming up. Special guest Avery Lentz from the Battles and Banter podcast joining us today. My co-host Matt Borders, the co-host with the mostest, is always out here with me. Today we're continuing our our summer and fall 1862 story right into the winter of 1862.
That's right.
We did the Maryland campaign. Obviously, September we talked about Robert E. Lee's first invasion of the North. We continued that at our last stop when we were out in Warrenton, where we covered the action between the Maryland campaign and the Fredericksburg campaign, the often forgotten 2nd Virginia, or the 1862 Loudon Valley campaign, which I'll touch on in just a moment here. And we're here today to talk about the Battle of Fredericksburg, which occurred, the big charges of the battle occurred right here on this day, 158 years ago. So we're going to take you through some of the major, more highlight points of that fight. But to get us there, let's just kind of bring us up to speed real quick. So, we left you initially at the end of the Maryland campaign, the Battle of Antietam, obviously the after action in Shepherdstown. We had both of these armies take a big step back, take a deep breath, right? Because we've been fighting and dying and marching all summer long here. Everybody kind of needed to see what was going on. And contrary to the popular belief, right, one of these armies, the Union Army, didn't really sit on their laurels the entire time. They actually did work with Washington. A plan was devised, and it was put into play. McClellan did take his army into the Loudon Valley in an attempt to sort of get Lee to divide his forces and then strike from there. Plan is going as it kind of is supposed to if you look at how it's set up on paper. Unfortunately, the impatience of Washington politics gets involved, and it's, when Longstreet gets out in front of McClellan around Culpeper, it's just too much. I guess Lincoln had sort of set it as his sort of like line in the sand, and if we hit this, is red line rather, if we hit this, I don't care what's happening X, Y, or Z, this is just the decision we're making it, and the decision made is change in command. McClellan is out, General Burnside's in. After a little bit of prompting, he takes a couple tries to get him in, the threat of putting Joe Hooker in there, and Burnside's like, all right, yeah, I'll take it. So Burnside's in command now, and he's got to basically come up with this new plan. The plan is always still kind of this on to Richmond mentality, but there's going to be a new way of doing it. He's going to steal a march, Avery.
Yes.
He's going to get moving from not the moment he takes command, but within a couple days. And tell us a little bit about this stolen march on Robert E. Lee.
So as we know, Burnside does take command of the Union Army of the Potomac on November 9th. It does take a few days to formulate a plan here. So he's going to present this plan to the Lincoln administration on November 14th, 1862. And what will happen here is Burnside is going to come up with the idea that instead of going directly at Lee around Culpeper, we're actually going to swing around him. We're going to head east, going to move to the left. We're going to come here to the Rappahannock River at the junction of Fredericksburg. Why are we heading here? It's because the Rappahannock River at this point is going to be its thinnest, only about 400 feet across from each bank. So Burnside's plan here is he's going to want to cross the army, the entire Union Army of the Potomac, which approximately is going to number about 120,000 men. So this is a pretty big force. And when you're trying to establish stealth, when you're trying to establish secrecy, that's a very difficult thing to do with that large of a force, especially in 1862.
Be very quiet.
During the winter months, no less. As we're moving into winter campaigning, everybody in the Army knows, at least in the high command knows, that it's very difficult to do so. Maybe not so much everybody in D.C., but Burnside realizes if if we're going to head towards Richmond, we need to utilize every major road network in this area as much as possible. But the most major road that he will be using is actually a railroad. It is the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad. And that actually is going to cross, there used to be, it still is a railroad bridge, a couple hundred so yards down the river here. He's going to basically use that railroad to supply his army as they move down two main roads towards Richmond. That was going to be the Telegraph Road and the old Richmond Stagecoach Road, which is of course Bowling Green Road or Route 2 today.
Right.
So the idea is we're going to use those two roads. We're going to keep our army supplied by railroad, and we're going to head somewhere between Richmond. We're going to head towards Richmond as bait to get the Confederate army under Lee to follow us. And then if Lee catches up, we dig in defensively. Lee's forced to attack us because he can't abandon Richmond. Burnside knows this. So Burnside goes into this campaign with a tactically defensive battle in mind somewhere. However, the strategic part of it is very aggressive. It's very fast. This army, Burnside's going to present this plan to Lincoln on the 14th. Lincoln says, I'm sold. And on the 15th, the entire Union Army begins to move out from Warrenton. And that's 120,000 men who will move 40 miles in 2 days. 40 miles in 2 days. They're going to reach where we are now on Stafford Heights, Falmouth. The Union Second Corps is the first to get here. The Union Second Corps, this is going to be a rough campaign for them, just saying this right off the bat. But they're the first ones here, and there's only 1,000 Confederate militia to oppose them. The Second Corps alone, roughly what, 20,000 men?
Yes. Significantly outnumbers these guys.
Yeah, it's not a contest. The only thing that's a huge issue is the fact that there is no bridge in the vicinity of Fredericksburg.
Which,
here.
coincidentally, today, if you could see, we'll take some shots
Yeah.
and we'll post them online a little later. But the bridge just off to our right is actually completely out right now for
This is
construction.
great. There's interpretive gold.
So if you were
It's
standing
awesome.
where
Yeah.
we're standing right now in 1862, much like today, you would see that there is no way to get across the river right over here.
Yeah, had to divert around just to get here. So yeah, I can imagine what it was like in 1862. So there are 3 bridges in the vicinity: the Railroad Bridge, Chatham Bridge, which is also known as the George Street Bridge, and also Falmouth Bridge, which would have been further up. All 3 have been destroyed by Confederate militia by the time the Union Army gets here. But Burnside, actually, contrary to previous belief, did have an idea that this would be an issue. So he had put in an order when they began their march on the 15th to Henry Halleck, General-in-Chief of the Union War Department, basically saying, yo, I'm going to need these thingies. These are pontoons. As you can see, you're going to move closer so I can see? Okay.
Our producer here, can
Yes.
we see? Are we
Can we
good?
see
Do we
it?
need to move a little closer?
Okay. So these pontoons would have been carried on these wagons overland. But first, before they even get there, they got to be floated down to Aquia Landing on the Potomac River. Before they even get there, these pontoons particularly are coming from where, Pat?
Just for context, Matt and I covered this in the last Warrenton video. These are coming down from Berlin, Maryland, or if you're looking at a map today, Brunswick, Maryland, right? So they're coming down the C&O Canal system. That is a logistical nightmare. And then Washington.
Yep, and once they get to Washington, they're floated down to Aquia Landing, marched another couple of miles across from Aquia down to Stafford, then down to Falmouth. Yeah. So they're going to be basically supposedly supposed to be getting here the same time the Union Army is, roughly. All that journeying, they're supposed to get here on November 17th. Well, this is where things start to go south, no pun intended. Because the order for these pontoon boats gets lost, mysteriously. General Halleck will claim that he never got word of this request. I think that's baloney, but that's just me.
Good sandwiches.
Very good sandwiches. A lot of good... I'm not going to make a dad joke on that one, no. But the point of this is that by the time the Union Army starts to arrive here, those pontoons haven't even moved. And so what will happen is by the time Burnside gets here, between November 17th and 18th, he's telegraphing back to D.C. being, hey,
Where they at?
where are my boats? Where are my pontoons? And Halleck says, oh, okay, yeah, we'll get on that. Well, no, between November 17th, fast forward 10 days later, they finally get here. Yep. So at that point, the whole Union Army is here waiting to cross, but also the Confederates have finally caught on to what's going on. By the time Lee realizes that Burnside is to his east, to really his southeast, he goes, oh God, you got to get to Fredericksburg. And so he's going to actually send James Longstreet here first. The Confederate First Corps, the Army of Northern Virginia, will arrive on the high ground to the west of town. You can see kind of the treetops maybe in the background there. There's going to be roughly 40,000 Confederates sitting on that hilltop by November 27th.
Remember,
the same day.
1,000 militia.
Yeah.
And now 40,000.
Now 40,000. Now it's a little more of a problem. And so at this point, you're going to have 40,000 Confederates on those hills, but you still got 120,000 Union soldiers. So you're saying, okay, we got our pontoon boats here. We can cross and, maybe push Longstreet out of the way. But here's the issue. One thing that people seem to forget sometimes when they look at a winter campaign is the weather is a absolute major factor.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be miserable here in Virginia. It doesn't quite snow, doesn't quite rain, it kind of does a combination of the two. And that's going to turn these roads to muddy quagmires. It's going to, even more seriously, swell the Rappahannock behind us. It's going to become flooded. The banks become submerged. You can't very well build a pontoon bridge on a rapid torrent of rushing water. So now Burnside has this dilemma that we're going to wait for the current to calm. We're going to wait for the tides to go down. The weather has to give us an opening. Well, guess what? That's going to still mean Union Army is going to be immobile here. Confederates still have time to come over, to come to the western areas of Fredericksburg. They're still moving over muddy roads, but they have time to do so. That's going to be Jackson's 2nd Confederate Corps of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. Good old Stonewall. That march here is pretty miserable. Those guys have to come over mountains. Some elements are coming from the Shenandoah Valley. So they're going to be having a really nice long march getting here. But by the time they do, Jackson and Longstreet combined, the Confederate Army will number 78,000 Confederates by December 10th, 1862.
There were 1,000 guys here. Now we're talking 78,000 guys.
And Lee is fully aware that Burnside's going to cross somewhere in the vicinity of Fredericksburg. And also, contrary to previous belief, Burnside was looking at alternate places to cross. There is a place further downriver called Skinker's Neck. It's below Moss Neck, that actually was scouted by Union cavalry during the early days between December 4th and 5th of 1862. Union engineers and cavalry will be down near Skinker's Neck preparing to cross there. But as I said, it's really hard to move a large army like this in secrecy. And every move that they are doing is being observed by Confederates across the river. And unfortunately for the Union, the Confederate cavalry in this campaign is slightly better. Let's put it politely there. And they're going to be watching. Jeb Stuart will be watching this movement. Stuart's going to put his artillery, his horse artillery. Jackson will put some of his artillery further down the river. And that's actually going to contest with some Union naval gunboats that actually came up the Rappahannock that far upstream. And so that's going to dissuade Burnside from trying to cross below Fredericksburg. If you try to cross further up the river, you're basically in the wilderness. And ironically enough, Union armies will try crossing there in 1863 and 64 with slightly more success.
Goes a lot better than
but
that.
it's also spring when they do that, not the winter. So Burnside is left with a very limited option kind of spread here. He knows that if he does not cross here, that if we fall back and say, well, we tried, we're not going to cross, no battle before January 1st, that's going to have huge political ramifications for the Lincoln administration. Because, gentlemen, what's happening on January 1st of 1863?
The Emancipation Proclamation goes into effect.
Yes, and Lincoln really wants a Union victory because, my God, this is not a popular decision in some places in the North.
Right.
But we want to unify the war effort. We want to get people behind this proclamation. The best way to do so is to show that there is progress, tactically, militarily, on the battlefield. And so Lincoln is urging not just Burnside, but all his generals across the board to get a battle, not just a battle, but a victory before the end of the year. So as Burnside is here, you got William Rosecrans out in Tennessee. You have Ulysses S. Grant and William T. Sherman in Mississippi. And they're all going to be running into issues. Winter campaigning is hard. Cannot emphasize that enough. But Burnside here knows retreat, withdrawal, not really an option here. He's got to try to attack where he is. And that means crossing. And still, even with Confederates, right in your vicinity, right here at the town of Fredericksburg is the best place to cross this river. 400 feet separate the eastern bank from the western bank. That's where we are going to make an attempt to cross the river. You guys have anything to add before we...
Yeah, Matt wants to talk a little bit about the action where we're standing. We're up here at Chatham Manor, obviously because of the sweeping view it has of the town below. You know, got to have some nice scenery when you're filming, guys. But Matt's definitely really interested in the action that took place here, the artillery and stuff. So we're going to let Matt sort of get into that.
Well, General Burnside is going to make his decision to cross here at Chatham Manor and points along Stafford Heights on December 9th. Now, as we know, the fighting doesn't really get going for a couple of days because he makes that decision very late on the 9th and actually has to propose it to his forces on the 9th and throughout the 10th. However, by the 10th, pieces are moving, and we're going to have, by late on December 10th, 147 cannon being placed along the Stafford Heights, stretching up and down north and south of Stafford Heights, in preparation for covering these federal crossings. Around midnight from December 11th to the 12th, or excuse me, 10th to the 11th, we are going to have federal engineers. To the south of us, we're going to have the 15th New York Engineers, and right in this area at the upper and middle crossings, we will have the 50th New York Engineers preparing to move those pontoons. Now, those pontoon bridges that Avery was talking about is going to be a lot of work to get them down to the river, because, I mean, look at the height that we're at right here. They've got to get down to the river itself and set up.
There's about a 100-foot slope, 10 feet, 15
It's a nice
feet
little
behind
tumble
us.
if you take a wrong
It's
step.
pretty steep.
Now, this is going to take time. It's also going to be noisy. Now, they're going to do the best they can, trying to be, as Pat was suggesting earlier, as quiet as possible, as secret as possible, but Confederate forces are aware that something is going on this side of the river. We have Mississippi troops from General Barksdale's brigade moving down now into Fredericksburg proper, setting up along the banks and along the wharfs of Fredericksburg. The construction itself would begin in the very early AM on the 11th of December, trying to get these pontoon bridges going. And to the south of us, as Avery, you described in our original podcast episode, it goes fairly well.
Yes,
and
Lower
fairly
Crossing
quickly.
is a smashing success, and the bulk of the Left Grand Division of the Army of the Potomac will be moving across relatively early in the morning. But they also don't have a city in front of them.
Right.
So that's a
They're
significant
sitting there like, where are you guys?
Well, where we're at here at the center and northern crossings, they're going to have a much harder time, because though working throughout the early morning hours of the 11th, as this fog rolls in just before dawn, they would utilize that to their advantage as well. But finally, when those first morning rays begin to break through at around 5:10 in the morning, and those federal engineers out on the river are going to begin to come into focus, they're going to come under fire. And they're going to come under intense fire from those Mississippi troops along the wharves. Now, Avery, oftentimes we discuss the Mississippi troops as sharpshooters. Now, are these a dedicated sharpshooter unit? Or
They are not.
They are not.
regular
Okay.
infantry, well, volunteer infantry.
Sure.
They're just guys that happen to have pretty decent aim.
Right.
But also they're veterans. I think that's the most important thing. They're veterans of previous campaigns, but this is still going to be a new situation for them, because this is not a preferred situation of fighting in an urban area like this.
Right.
They have in the back of their minds realizing that they're just one brigade holding back potentially 2 Union Corps in front of them. And so what happens if the Union gets a foothold there? We now have to realize we're going to have to make a withdrawal through an urban area. Now, urban warfare is not new. It was done in the Mexican War, even parts of the War of 1812.
That's right.
But this, for the American Civil War, I don't think anyone from Mississippi and the Barksdale Brigade had really been in this situation before. It's a very unique morning for both sides.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, to cover this issue, we're going to have federal forces looking to the artillery, because those engineers, they're going to scamper back to this side of the river very quickly when they come under fire. And so that means the show is now going to turn to this gentleman. This is Brigadier General Henry Jackson Hunt. He's one of my favorite commanders in the Army of the Potomac. He commands the entire artillery for the Army of the Potomac, and he's the one in charge of those 147 guns over here. And
Gotta make some ketchup.
Hunt's ketchup. Thank you for that,
I couldn't
Avery.
resist.
We talk about ketchup a lot on our show
Oh, my
recently because we
God.
did Pittsburgh stuff recently. We talked about the Heinz.
Yeah,
Apparently
yeah.
we like ketchup.
Who doesn't?
I'm so
Now,
sorry.
General Hunt
Yes.
is going to engage Fredericksburg. He's going to begin to bombard the wharf, and bombard the town itself, trying to suppress these Mississippi soldiers. When the guns go silent, the engineers scamper back out onto the pontoons, and once again they're going to come under fire, and once again they will fall back. And this is going to happen 3 times, with this engineers going out, being fired upon, falling back, the artillery opens up. By 9:15, Hunt is very annoyed. He will actually order 36 additional guns, gun howitzers, likely Napoleons, down to the banks itself to fire directly into the wharves. Now, these big guns that have been up here, they've been hitting the front of Fredericksburg, they've been hitting the riverfront and points beyond.
Basically every property between Sophia Street, which is the closest street to us, all the way up to Caroline Street. So you have Sophia, Princess Anne, Caroline, that might be backwards, whatever. Point is, 3 streets.
3 block
radius. 3
radius.
block radius is getting
2 blocks?
pummeled.
Okay.
Well, yeah. We don't know math. The point is that the Confederates are hunkering down a lot of the times in basements or cellars. They're shooting from lower areas. They'll go down to the cellars once the shelling starts, come back up to the main levels of the house once it stops. So this kind of push-pull kind of relay that's happening with the engineers and the Mississippians, I can see why Hunt's getting frustrated. So Matt, what does he
Absolutely.
decide to do?
36 howitzers are brought down to the banks of the Rappahannock to fire directly into those wharves, directly into those warehouses, and try to dig them out of those basements. Now, Avery was just commenting about 400 feet across the the Rappahannock River. Different river.
Yes.
We're Maryland campaign guys, forgive us.
This is point blank range for this artillery, and they are going to pound the riverfront into rubble. But unfortunately, as we know as American Civil War historians, what happens with rubble in the war? This isn't high explosive shells. They're not just dropping full buildings. They're pounding these brick structures into a rubble that the Confederates are still able to hide behind because they're absorbing those shells. And so, 45 minutes of bombardment would occur. Again, the engineers are sent out, and again, they would come under fire. At this point, Ambrose Burnside, Hunt's boss, is mad. And he is madder than a wet hen. He will order Hunt to do something about this resistance. In fact, he would claim that the army is being strangled by the throat by sharpshooters. And he wants something done.
Not sharpshooter.
Quote unquote sharpshooter.
Quote unquote sharpshooter, exactly. Hunt would then take all of his guns, all 186 cannon, and begin to bombard Fredericksburg. The resulting bombardment is the heaviest, one of the heaviest of the war that we have seen up until this point. It is going to decimate approximately 3 blocks of Fredericksburg itself. The newspapers of both sides would comment on this horrendous detonation, the crumbling of buildings and walls, chimneys are going down, and this would continue for 2 hours, approximately 12:30 to around 2:30. When this lets up, once more, the engineers are sent forward.
And once
And
more,
once again,
Mississippians are there.
They're
but
still
these
there.
bridges have to get made.
Yes.
And before we head over there, let's take a quick look. Actually, right here at Chatham Manor, they have a 3/4 scale, I believe, of one of the pontoons that they had to help bridge. So we'll head over here now and just sort of let you guys take a look. Maybe have Avery or Matt talk about the pontoons, but you can see the engineers would have had quite a time being quiet. You know, they're supposed to be moving these massive pontoons with these overlays, things like that. They're doing it on wagons. And again, all within earshot of your enemy right across the river. So it's one of those things. I'm going to step out of the shot just so the camera can see it real quick, and I'll let these two guys go ahead and talk about the pontoons.
Well, what's really interesting, Matt, is that this is just one span.
Right.
So, this is just a section. You have 2 boats, like I described in this photo, coming over the wagons, and then you would have had actual planks being set up, all of it bound together by rope, if you can see it, and all of this tied together, and you're supposed to be looping all of this in and out, laying these planks, and then while that's the next span is being assembled out in front of it, you're also being shot at. It's an extremely hard job. And this can't be emphasized enough. When
Exactly.
like, depending on the size of the river, these blocks, let's just call it a block, you would have had at least maybe 12 to 24 more of these, depending on the length and width of the river. Now, 400 feet, it's not that large of a distance, but it's significantly harder when you're getting shot at. It seems probably like it's an eternity getting this bridge built.
Absolutely. Avery, you had a great quote when we did the original episode about the 50th engineers. You said the way you kind of keep them straight is because of what? They took a percentage of casualties, wasn't it?
Yeah, 50% casualties here. They're going to lose half their number. The engineers, non-combatants by definition, are going to take the worst casualties of their career, pretty much, during December 11th of 1862. And now that doesn't mean half the unit was killed. That means at least half the unit, someone was hit or killed.
Right.
And a lot of their bodies are going to be falling in the river. You're going to have very ghastly scenes of bodies floating in the water, floating downstream, being caught further down at lower crossing. So imagine how probably unnerving and macabre it is if you're successfully building a lower pontoon crossing, Union infantry's crossing, and oh goodness, there's Ed. I know him. He's in the 50th New York Edge. Oh Jesus. Like, you know, that's a pretty alarming situation. And it's a sign to the rest of the Army that something is not going well up here.
And that's a great point, too, about the lower crossings, because they're going to be done by 11 a.m.
Yeah.
And like Avery said, they start crossing their forces. Now, of course, Burnside is really hoping to get everybody moving at the same time, so we're not going to necessarily see the entire Sixth Corps moving yet, but chunks of it are beginning to cross to form a beachhead. We've got to do something up here, and once again, General Hunt, he is going to recommend something unique. Drastic. These big old boats, and again, we can see them there on the wagons, he is going to recommend using them to move infantry across, to clear the bridgehead on the opposite side of the river at Fredericksburg and push those Confederates out using Federal infantry. And he is going to get 4 regiments to volunteer to do this. You guys remember who they are?
7th Michigan,
Woo!
19th and 20th Massachusetts.
Yes.
And the 89th New York.
80.
Words are hard.
89th New York.
All right,
further
so
down.
we're gonna head across. Give us a real-time time check. Somebody got the time real fast?
My phone's on there.
We're gonna get a real-time time check real fast.
9:30.
All right, it's 9:30. We're gonna get ourselves across to the side of the upper crossing, literally right across the river from us right here. 9:30, it'll give us about a half hour. We're gonna go live again at 10:30, so we'll go live in about an hour, and we're gonna pick the story back up with those 4 regiments, and then we're gonna move through a little bit of the action to come. A beachhead, which Avery and I will talk about, do a little bantering, and then
I know it's coming.
We'll talk about a pretty nasty street fight. So thanks for sticking with the History Things podcast. Our special guest Avery Lentz from the Battles of Banter podcast. Again, you're watching our Battle of Fredericksburg field exclusive, sponsored by TR Historical.
More to come.